Good morning, everybody, and welcome to TLC Live as every Wednesday at 11 in the morning. And I'm Andrea Gomez, and I want to welcome my co host from Montana, Orlando Sánchez. Orlando, good morning.
Buenos días, Andrea, ¿cómo estás?
Muy bien, ¿y tú? ¿Cómo está todo el clima? Vi fotos
Bueno,
de
bien.
nieve y frío.
Sí, las puse todas por Facebook, so you can catch them on Facebook, but we've had all kinds of weather here, rain and snow and great sunshine, and it's been magnificent. And I will be back tomorrow.
Yeah, crazy weather over there, crazy weather here. We have
I
a
know.
lot of rain, and finally, we have a sunny day today.
I bet the humidity's pretty high too.
Oh yeah, it's crazy. But okay, at least it's sunny today, so that's good. But a lot of flooding and a lot of rain, and well, it's Houston. So what can I tell you?
It is what it is.
Yeah.
So
So
anyway, we have an exciting show today, right? We're going to talk about immigration because, this is a subject that is a sort of a perpetual subject. We have as I remind everybody, I'm an immigrant. Andrea's an immigrant, and our next guest that'll come up in just a second is also an immigrant. We're proud Americans. We love this country. We fight for this country. We love the Constitution. We love constitutional government. We love freedom. We love liberty. We love free markets. We're all here for that purpose and that reason, despite what a lot of the media wants to report. But we are all, American patriots, happen to be immigrants making contributions in this country. But immigration's an issue, Andrea, as you know, as long as you've been in the United States. And since the 1980s, we haven't had any major revisions to the immigration issue, and it continues to be a fiasco, especially along our southern border. And because Texas has the longest border with our neighbor Mexico, we bear the brunt of the issues, not only in the terms of the crises on the border, the stresses on our infrastructure, both our sheriffs, our EMS, our schools, our hospitals, but also our taxpayers have to bear the brunt of the cost of housing these folks, these young children, when they're being kept safe in facilities. The taxpayer has to pick that up. So it's generally a fiasco. And on top of that, we've had an issue that's been, sort of on the back burner, sometimes on the front burner, which is deferred action, DACA, for childhood arrivals. And that's why we invited Juan Carlos Cerda today to talk to us. He helps lead a coalition of diverse businesses across the state of Texas that, among other people, are trying to bring some sanity, some logical sense to the problems that illegal immigration and bring to families, quite frankly. As you know, Texas Latino Conservatives has been very involved in the immigration issue. We have our own proposal, which we call family stabilization. And for those of you just joining us, family stabilization, in my opinion, is a quite simple program that for the families that have lived here, parents with children, and they've never violated the penal code, we're asking that the federal government consider allowing them to apply for a legal status. They pay for all the costs associated with it, provided there's never been a violation of the penal code in a serious way, and they can reapply every 5 years, but there is no pathway to citizenship. That's very important for us as conservatives. We went through this in the 1980s when Ronald Reagan provided amnesty, and Congress told us that they were going to secure the border, Andrea, that they were going to fix the issue, and it's only gotten worse. So conservatives all are very skeptical of anything that has a pathway to citizenship. And so that's why we at Texas Latino Conservatives have proposed a legal process for documentation that's renewable every 5 years, but no pathway to citizenship, but does give families the legal status. That's a little bit different than DACA. That's why I'm going to let you introduce Juan Carlos, Andrea. But Juan Carlos is going to talk to us about the difference in the immigration issues, in temporary protective status, in DACA, the executive actions that come out of the White House. So, Andrea, why don't you go ahead and introduce Juan Carlos to us?
Yeah, we welcome Juan Carlos Cerda. He was born in San Luis Potosi, and his parents brought him when he was 7 years old, and now he's a DACA recipient, and he is the state director of the Texas Business Immigration Coalition. Juan Carlos, bienvenido, buenos días, gracias por estar con nosotros y gracias por tu tiempo. Welcome, Juan Carlos.
Thank you, Andrea and Orlando. It's a pleasure for you to have me with you this morning. Buenos dias.
So, Juan Carlos, first of all, tell us a little bit about your background. Now, we know that you came to the United States when your parents brought you. I'm assuming that your parents, I don't know what their legal status was, but I'm assuming that they didn't have the necessary documentation. But you're one of those fortunate kids that came here early. I'm assuming culturally, you're pretty much a Texan and an American like I am. I mean, even though I was born in Havana, Cuba, culturally, I'm a Texan. I consider myself a citizen of the United States, a proud citizen. I am a citizen of the United States, and I consider this my home country. This is my anchor. But you also had some great educational opportunities, and that's what makes America great. So tell us a little bit about your story, and tell us, about your uh, education in this country.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more, Orlando. I came to the US when I was 7 years old with my family from San Luis Potosi, Mexico. We came to this country for a better future and better opportunities. In fact, my grandfather was a migrant farm worker in South Texas during the 1960s, picking fruits and vegetables. And he's now a permanent resident thanks to President Ronald Reagan. And there's a great example of what happens when you give people the chance to get right with the law. So I grew up undocumented. I knew that it was going to affect my educational outcomes and opportunities. And I didn't know if I was going to be able to put my education to use, but I still worked hard. I mean, I graduated from high school as salutatorian, and I got a full scholarship to attend Yale University, and it completely changed my life. But I knew that if I didn't have this opportunity to put my skills to use, that it was not going to go very far. So it was only because of undocumented students like myself who grew up here, sharing our stories, going out there, being public about this, pushing our president and Congress to do something about our status, that we were able to get the DACA program in 2012. And it also changed my life because it gave me the chance to get a first legal job, a driver's permit, and also the chance to study abroad and now currently to buy a house. I'm a homeowner thanks to the ability to have an income and to be here in this country that I dearly love.
Juan Carlos,
So
we were
explain to us a
talking.
little bit about hang on just a minute, Andrea, just real quick so that people watching, because there's a lot of confusion between what are dreamers, what's executive action, what is DACA? Is DACA, a proposal for Congress? How come, the executive orders actually do achieve these deferred actions for a while? So just give us a little briefing on the differences, define dreamers, define TACA recipients. And I find it interesting that your grandfather has not become a U.S. citizen, which is my argument of why we shouldn't push so much for a pathway to citizenship when over 63% of those eligible to apply for citizenship under the Ronald Reagan, the legislation he signed never did. And so that's why I say that family stabilization is a much better process because it normalizes the status, it makes people come out of the shadows, and it doesn't grant a pathway to citizenship. But tell us about Dreamers, DACA, and all the different definitions, Juan Carlos.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so many definitions, and I can just start with the term undocumented. I mean, my parents are undocumented. My father is an electrician. My mother is a factory worker. They're both hardworking, pious people, and they brought me to this country to provide a better future for me. I grew up here basically as American in all but paper, and a lot of us who studied and worked hard, we gave ourselves the term dreamer because our dream was to not only get a career, but also a chance to live the American dream, to have a house, to have a family, to be able to have children who are Americans, just like me and like my siblings. So that's where the term dreamer came from. And these dreamers like myself, we advocated for a path to legalization for ourselves, and we pushed President Obama and Congress to do something about it. In fact, in 2010, there was a proposal by Senator Dick Durbin from Illinois called the DREAM Act, and this legislation unfortunately failed in 2010, and that's the reason why we pushed President Obama to do something about it, and he decided to do DACA, but obviously it hasn't been enough because it is an executive order that has to be renewed by every president. It can be taken away, as we saw in 2017 when President Trump decided to end the DACA program. And it is at the subject of the federal court system. We saw in 2020 that, and before that, there was a lawsuit by the Texas Attorney General and other attorney generals across the nation against the DACA program. And this led to being in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruling that unfortunately you cannot end this program with like the way the Trump administration did and put the 800,000 DACA eligible individuals like myself in danger because we have jobs. Many of us have houses. We have cars that we pay. We've been contributing members of our communities and our churches. And to remove this protection without some sort of pathway, it's just it's difficult. So we need Congress to act. We need them to pass existing legislation that's out there. There's legislation that Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, who's a Republican, is co-sponsoring with Senator Durbin, called the DREAM Act of 2021, and it provides individuals who graduated from high schools or are pursuing a GED, who are working, who are in the military, who are in higher education, who can pass background checks, that chance to become legal citizens as a starting point. So that's what we're advocating for, and those are the definitions that may be confusing to a lot of people, but it's important for everyone to know what they are.
Juan Carlos, DACA, and we were talking about TPS before we went on the air. And DACA and TPS are two things that you have to renew every certain years. But with DACA recipients, it's completely different than the TPS recipients. And the reason I'm saying that is because when we were talking about your background and where you were born, and you said, I born in San Luis Potosí, but my memories are always in this country. Everything I know is in this country. And I bet you that you speak, I mean, of course, you were speaking Spanish when you came to this country, but now you speak probably more English than Spanish. And you feel like many other dreamers that I talked about before, you feel this country as your country. This is the only thing that you pretty much remember since you were a child.
That's right. My first memory, and I don't know why it's this, but I remember being in Atlanta, Georgia. We were there for a few months, and me with my parents, and we ended up moving to Dallas, Texas, where I grew up for the most part. I mean, I grew up Texan. I grew up not only basically learning English. I remember that when I do have like 1 year of memory of Mexico, and I remember not really being able to communicate that well with people there. But I think that for the most part, I mean, I belong to the United States. I mean, my parents always told me to be law abiding, to believe in God and freedom of will. And honestly, like, I wouldn't know what to do if I left this country. If DACA were to be taken away, which it might very well might, because there's a federal court case led by Andrew Hanen of Houston that will determine the constitutionality of DACA in the coming weeks. Any day now, he's going to rule on it. And if I have to leave this country, I would be in Mexico, a place that I haven't visited in now over 20 years, and I wouldn't know what to do. I would be uprooted, my house, I wouldn't be able to pay my mortgage. And I just got married a month ago. I mean, what would I do without my wife and without my parents, who basically they've been here longer than I have?
Yeah, and some of the dreamers they don't even speak Spanish. I mean, at least we were speaking in Spanish before we came on the air, but many of the DACA recipients they don't even speak Spanish.
That's right. I mean, you have cases of DACA recipient dreamers who just found out that they were undocumented when they were in high school because they were applying for driver's licenses, and they couldn't they didn't know where their social security number was, and their parents would tell them you're undocumented, and that was devastating. I mean, I knew personally that I was undocumented. It was not a secret that was kept from me, but you'd be surprised how many DACA eligible dreamers, which there are 800,000 nationwide, they've experienced this. And many of them, I mean, they came younger than I have. I have friends who are DACA recipient dreamers who were 2 or 3 years old before they could even speak. So they don't even really know Spanish or any of their native country's language.
Juan Carlos, as you know, because you follow this legislation far more closely than I do, but in politics, timing is everything and images are important. And, I was thinking the other day after I sat in on your seminar last week that you were kind enough to invite me to, that the timing probably couldn't be worse for the DREAM Act. With this crisis on the border, everybody's focused on the invasion, and I use that word loosely, but it is a human invasion, right? When you see tens of thousands or 5,000 people moving in a caravan towards the border, the American taxpayer gets concerned about that because they know that they're going to, at the end of the day, bear the brunt of this wave of humanity that is coming. Um, and Congress has done nothing. There's very little that the president can do other than issue executive orders, as you mentioned, that Obama, had the deferred action for childhood arrivals, which we call DACA. But as you say, it's been challenged. It's a political football. And unfortunately, Congress won't act because Congress, at least in the House of Representatives, has to go back to their constituents and ask to be reelected. And part of the problem is that generally conservatives, and we pride ourselves on being people that live by the rule of law, by the Constitution, by the existing laws. And so when conservatives see these waves of undocumented people coming across the border, the burdens being placed on our border communities, and just the hordes and the millions, anywhere between 15 to 20 million undocumented people in this country, the taxpayers and particularly conservatives say enough is enough. And so while we're having these images at the border, you know, what do you think the chances of passing a DREAM Act or perpetuating DACA are going to be when all we see in the news is the crises?
Orlando, I would actually argue that there's no better chance to pass the DREAM Act and enact immigration reform in 2021. I think that the border situation is actually an opportunity. There's no ignoring the border and what's happening there. And Americans are sick and tired of there not being solutions to this problem because it's been happening for years and it's going to happen if there are no legislative reforms that will address this. That's why legislators like our own Texas Senator John Cornyn is working with senators like Senator Kirsten Sinema of Arizona and our Texas Congressman Tony Gonzalez and Henry Cuellar, a Republican and a Democrat respectively, on a solution called the Bipartisan Border Solutions Act. And this legislation would actually not only streamline the asylum system, but it would protect unaccompanied minors and put more immigration judges on the border to actually assess which asylum claims are legitimate and which are not. So this legislation is actually opening up the possibility that we can do broader immigration reform, because if you're able to address the border, then we can work on legalizing and providing a pathway to people who are already here. I mean, that's something that Republicans and conservatives talk about all the time. In fact, Republican pollster Frank Luntz, who's a very respected Republican pollster, he did a focus group study with a group of Trump voters, and he found that many Trump voters, they support a pathway to citizenship for undocumented children who are like myself, who came at a young age, as well as border security. So if you work on those two things, border security and also a pathway to legalization for people who are already here, then you have a winning piece of solution. So that's what we're doing, and there's no greater opportunity. I mean, we saw that already legislation like the Dream and Promise Act passed the US Congress. So did the Farm Workforce Modernization Act, and both pieces of legislation would provide a pathway to legal status for dreamers like myself and for undocumented farm workers. and they were bipartisan. I mean, we saw that the Dream and Promise Act got 8 Republican members of Congress voting in favor of it, and the Farm Workforce Modernization Act got upwards of 30, 40 Republican members of Congress voting yes. So the American public is ready for reform, and this is an opportunity that our members of Congress have to take advantage of. We can't keep punting the football down the line. It can't be a wedge issue anymore. People are sick and tired of it.
Well, it is a wedge issue, unfortunately, and I wholeheartedly agree. Look, the culpability lies at the foot of Congress. They've had decades and decades and decades to reform, adjust, change, completely overhaul immigration legislation, and they don't do it. And so, it has become a political football. And unfortunately, what's happening, given the images that we see in the media, is that the anger is placed on the immigrant. And so, you know, whether it's you or whether it's me, because of our last names, people get angry, and I understand that taxpayers are fed up. But as I remind people all the time, and I tell my fellow conservatives, your anger shouldn't be directed towards Juan Carlos or towards Andrea or towards me. We're, the immigrants. Yes, Juan Carlos came with his parents and they're undocumented, and but the anger really should be with Congress that does nothing. And so one of the things I do want to say, Juan Carlos, is that we have to be very careful when we talk about. I've noticed several times you've used pathway. Uh, and you have to be very clear, pathway to what? I mean, sometimes you use it interchangeably, pathway to citizenship or pathway towards documentation and legalization. So, I always caution my conservative friends that if you talk about pathway to citizenship, it's basically DOA among conservatives. Um, I just have talked to too many conservatives in this country and in Texas, and they don't want to give the most coveted piece of paper, which is legal citizenship, naturalization papers, to folks who violated our policy at some point in their life. But they are comfortable with the idea of legislation that allows for a legal status where undocumented families can be documented. And by the way, Juan Carlos, we also spent tens of thousands of dollars as our political action committee. I don't know if I shared this with you. We polled the 5 largest counties in Texas, and we polled only primary Republican voters. We tried to find the most conservative people. And 54% of those surveyed supported what we call family stabilization, which is a pathway towards documentation, legalization, provided there's no penal code violation with no pathway to citizenship. But another 20 something percent of Republican primary voters did support a pathway to citizenship. So, it's very important that we define what these pathways are. But if we start just trying to promote pathway to citizenship for the 15, 13, 11 million, 20 million undocumented aliens, I think it's DOA, dead on arrival, because, you know, uh, the American people just don't want to give that cherished piece of paper to folks that violated our policy. That's just my opinion. I thought I'd share it with you.
Well, I
Uh,
definitely respect your opinion, Orlando, and I just a quick response to that. I mean, we know that at least undocumented individuals here in Texas actually contribute $4 billion in taxes, so they do contribute to our state. And if we narrow that down to Texas dreamers, we contribute over $963 million. That's why business leaders like Republican Woody Hunt created the Texas Opportunity Coalition to provide legal status as a starting point to individuals who contribute to our economy, because 96% of dreamers are either working or in school. And if we take away people like myself, then we face a GDP loss of $6 billion per year. So this is a issue that has to be addressed. And that's why business leaders across Texas, higher education institutions, and also associations, over 100 of them support the Texas Opportunity Coalition. And it's backed by Senator Cornyn because he ran on this issue. He wants a solution for dreamers, and he wants to address the border as well. So he asked for a cover and support, and that's what we're doing as the Texas Opportunity Coalition. And I invite you and your viewers to learn more about us at texasopportunity.org and help us support Senator Cornyn's leadership on this issue.
Yeah. By the way, let me be clear, Juan Carlos. I support the Dream Act for young folks. It's no fault of their own. Culturally, you're just like me. I mean, I came here when I was 3 years old. Culturally, I'm an American. Even though I speak Spanish, my first language is English. I'm educated here. I served in the U.S. Armed Forces as a legal resident, and I know you're in the same boat. It's not your fault, and it's not the Dreamers' fault. So let me make it clear. I personally support the Dream Act. What I think is going to have a tougher time, and I'm just saying when we talk about these issues, when we mention pathway, anything that is a pathway to citizenship for undocumented folks, in my opinion, is DOA. But I support the legislation that Senator Cornyn is proposing. I support a pathway for citizenship for the Dreamers. And, I think as much as I hate executive orders, Juan Carlos, I mean, I thought that the DACA was probably, you know, the appropriate thing to do to keep you guys from being shipped back to, deported to your native countries when, as you say, you don't know the culture. You probably don't know a lot of people there. You have very few friends there. You have a hard time communicating. So, anyway, I just wanted to clear that up. But I am supportive of the Dream Act, and I hope that legislation allows our dreamers to stay here and continue to make the contributions that you talk about.
And that's why exactly I highlight the difference between TPS and DACA, because TPS is a completely different situation. I mean,
Well, tell
they
people
didn't
what
come.
TPS is. Let's not use acronyms. What is TPS, Andrea? Tell our audience what TPS
The
is.
temporary protection status for people that came here after hurricanes in the Central America, and now Haiti, that also suffer a lot of natural disasters. So that's why I was highlighting the difference between DACA recipients and TPS, because DACA recipients, as you just mentioned, Orlando, they're kids that they came here and it's not their fault. They were brought by the parents. And as Juan Carlos was saying, by the time that they were in high school and trying to get a driver license, they didn't even know that they were not documented. So that's a big difference. But Juan Carlos, I wanted you to talk about the organization that you represent, the Texas Business Immigration Coalition. What did you guys do over there?
Absolutely. And thank you, Orlando and Andrea, for supporting me and my cause to one day become a permanent resident of the U.S. And my estimation, I want to be a citizen too, and I want to participate fully in the country that I dearly love. But I work for the Texas chapter of the American Business Immigration Coalition. We promote common sense immigration reform, and we're led by co-chairs like Woody Hunt, the senior chairman of Hunt Companies, John Rowe, the former chairman of Exelon Corporation, and Al Cardenas, the former chairman of the Florida Republican Party. And our goal is to legalize the 11 million undocumented immigrants that live in the U.S. And we know that any solution has to include a pathway to legal status for DACA recipient and dreamers like myself. And that's why Woody Hunt created the Texas Opportunity Coalition. He is a businessman in El Paso who understands the problem because 10% of the city's population is an immigrant. And he knows that this is an issue that has to be addressed because 204,000 DACA eligible dreamers live here in Texas, contributing $963 million in taxes to our state. That's money for airports and schools and roads. And the reason why he created the Texas Opportunity Coalition is because it's modeled on the Texas Mexico Trade Coalition that he created in 2017. Because Texas, 100,000 jobs from Texas depend on trade with Mexico. And this coalition, the Texas Mexico Trade Coalition, was responsible for getting unanimous support from the Texas congressional delegation for the USMCA, which passed in late 2019, early 2020. It was a fantastic achievement that shows that if you work in bipartisan ways, like this group of business leaders, that you can create legislative solutions to problems like trade. So that is the same model that we're using with the Texas Opportunity Coalition. It's chambers of commerce, its associations, higher education institutions. Some of them you may know, like the Texas Association of Business, the Texas Association of Manufacturers, the University of Texas San Antonio, and also some business leaders that you may know, like Dick Weekly, who builds Weekly Homes, and Harlan Crow from Crow Development Company, and Charlie Amato, who owns part of the San Antonio Spurs. So that's what we're starting with. We know that the Dreamer issue is the most popular one in Texas. 63% of Texas voters support a pathway for us, including 46% of Republicans and 87% of Democrats. So any solution has to include us. And we're seeing that there are already bipartisan legislation already out there, like the Dick Durbin and the Lindsey Graham Dream Act of 2021. I mean, Congressman Joe Barton, he's a dear friend of mine, Republican. He told me himself, dreamers like myself, we're making America great again. So we got to start with this.
Hey, Juan Carlos, that's interesting. I wanted to ask you, I was a big supporter of Marco Rubio, senator from Florida, obviously, the son of a fellow Cuban immigrant. For those of you to, because sometimes I get tired of people trashing immigrants, and we do make a contribution. I understand the illegal immigration problem is a huge problem for our country, but folks, that's just a failure of our Congress. And the sooner they get to work, and the sooner they as Juan Carlos said, have more administrative judges to hear asylum cases, the more permits, legal permits, they can issue for those that want to come and work in the United States, that are background checked, the better off we're all going to be. But we can't have any resolutions until Congress acts. But nonetheless, Senator Marco Rubio joined the Gang of Eight many, many years ago to propose, sensible immigration reform. And of course, that kind of fell apart. But where is Senator Rubio with respect to the Durbin and Graham bill on the Dreamers?
Interesting you asked that, Orlando, because we just had a summit in Central Orlando and Central Florida to get more support for the DREAM Act and for other pieces of legislation like the Farm Workforce Modernization Act. And our ask was for Senator Rick Scott and Senator Rubio to support, at least at the minimum, a DREAM Act, because there's more than 23,000 DACA eligible dreamers in the state of Florida. And Senator Rubio actually has responded saying that, yes, there must be a solution to dreamers, but we also have to address the border. So we're asking Senator Rubio to work together with senators like John Cornyn, with Lindsey Graham, who are already part of a group of basically a gang of 14 is what they're calling it. It includes Republican and Democratic senators who have been meeting since March. I mean, this is not news. This is public. They're working on something. We're hoping that they're going to come with a deal, hopefully sometime in the coming months. And they need our support. And that's where I think Texas and Latino voters and other Latino voters across the country can do, is to call their senators and write to them and tell them that we need a solution. We need to not only address dreamers, but we need to also address what's happening on the border, because that's something that I know that your group cares about. So why not work together and try to reach a compromise like what Senator Cornyn is doing? And let's support them, and let's give them that cover that they desperately need in order to get this done. I mean, in 2013, this Gang of Eight that you mentioned, I mean, it failed because there was no cover, there was no support. People weren't contacting their senators and members of Congress and telling them, we need this now. And if they were, there just wasn't enough noise. So there needs to be more noise this time around.
Well, let me repeat, because, even though I'm a supporter of Senator Rubio's, and I did support him in the primary for the presidency, as I told my dear friend Karl Rove many years ago when President Bush was working on immigration reform, I said, anything that contains a pathway to citizenship for undocumented aliens is DOA, in my opinion. And I will continue to repeat that. But I am for a legal status. I am for documenting folks that are here, that are law abiding and contributing. And I am for DACA. And I am for giving the dreamers a pathway for citizenship, but not for those that were of age to know that they were violating U.S. policy when they got here. And I think if we continue to articulate that, we're going to have better success, because we're not going to be giving away citizenship for those that violated the policy, other than the dreamers. This is the exception because it's not the dreamers' fault. But I agree with Senator Rubio. We've got to simultaneously address the border issue that's affecting our counties in Texas. But anyway, I will continue to sort of differentiate the different pathways that we talk about. Anything, in my opinion, that contains a pathway to citizenship for undocumented aliens that violated U.S. policy is DOA. But I do support the Dreamers.
Juan Carlos, you were mentioned, that you feel that you are from Texas and you feel Tejano, and okay. Um, and our organization is the Texas Latino Conservatives. You identify yourself as a conservative, and why?
If you define conservative as a person of faith who believes in free will and in the ability to choose one's destiny, then yes, I am that. I am a person of faith. I was raised Catholic. My parents raised me Catholic. I actually just completed my confirmation not too long ago, about a year and a half ago. And my parents, I mean, they're devout Catholic parishioners. I can tell you that late in 2019, my parents, who are both undocumented, by the way, they they decided to become godfathers to my little cousins. And even though they're afraid to drive because they're not eligible to get driver's licenses in the state of Texas, they still went, and they asked me to take them because they don't want to go to heaven and have to explain to God why they couldn't baptize and be godfathers to my little cousins. Their belief in God overrules that fear. So that's something that I always reiterate, because my parents, they work hard. I mean, they join their church group because they know that it is something that they have to give back to, and it's a community that accepts them regardless of their immigration status. Look, my parents, they just want to be free from fear. They don't want to be stopped by police under laws like SB4 for a broken tail light, or something like a traffic infraction, and have to be put in deportation proceedings. That's something that we have to talk about, because it really affects people like my parents. My mother says that she's scared of driving outside of Dallas County, where she lives, and she asked me to help her find the best routes for her when she gets a new job. So that's something we don't want to tear families apart. That's anti-conservative. We believe in family unity. Family is the building block of society. If we have a healthy family, then we can produce better societal outcomes. And we also believe in people being able to have free will and to determine their destiny, and to produce for the good of society. So if we were to give, for example, that hopefully some legal status to people like my parents, they would be able to pursue opportunities that would better their income. I can give you the example of my father, who's an electrician. He's a veteran electrician, by the way. He's skilled at what he does. But because he doesn't have a driver's permit, he can't drive the company trucks. He has to be driven around. And if he were given that chance to get a green card, even if it doesn't have a pathway to citizenship, he would be happy with that. It would just change his life, because he would be able to get a master's electrician license, and that would just produce better outcomes for our family. So I'm not saying that citizenship shouldn't be off the table. I'm just saying that we need to start somewhere. We have to start somewhere that everybody can agree on. And I think, Orlando, you're going in the right direction. We just have to talk with people across the aisle to see what bargain we can strike up.
Well, look, I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I can tell you that under our proposal, which is family stabilization, if your mom and dad have been law abiding and have never violated the penal code, they would be eligible for, what I call a legal temporary residency, renewable every 5 years until they pass away or decide to move back to their home country. But I want to address something, because I want my listeners to understand me. I've been in public service in elected office for many years, for 25 years in this country. That's a quarter century. That's probably a lot longer time than you've been alive, Juan Carlos. I was first elected. I was the first immigrant, Hispanic, ever elected to the Houston City Council, the fourth largest city in America. And I was the first Hispanic immigrant elected in Harris County, the third largest county in the United States, as an immigrant to a non-judicial position. So let me make perfectly clear, because Andrea asked you why you're a conservative, and I loved your answers because that you gave. But let me tell you why I'm a conservative. I'm a conservative first and foremost because of the United States Constitution. The United States Constitution and the way this country was formed was a Republican form of government. And I don't mean a Republican in the sense of Democrat Republican, but where the form of a representation, a scheme of representation takes place. The Constitution clearly says that powers not specifically delegated to the federal government are reserved for the states. Now, you mentioned SB4. SB4 was the will of the people of the state of Texas. And to me, as an elected official, and for police officers, and for members of the United States military, we all take an oath of office. Whether you're a police officer, member of the military, or an elected local city councilman, that you will protect and defend the Constitution and preserve and defend the laws of this state and of the United States. It's always been a burr in my saddle when cities like Houston proposed sanctuary cities. That to me was an invitation to continue the lawlessness south of the border. In other words, that was telling people that if you come here undocumented and you get to a sanctuary city, our law enforcement will not ask you about your status. Now, I know you're very sensitive about that because of your parent situation. And let me tell you, my heart bleeds for them. But the fact of the matter is, the reason we're conservatives and love this country, the reason I'm a conservative and love this country, is because we follow the rule of law. The rule of law is the will of the people. And so SB4 was the will of the people of the Texas through their elected representatives. Now we can change that, but that's always been a burr in my saddle. That we take issue. We may not like the laws. There's several tax laws that I don't like, but at the end of the year, on April 15th, I pay my taxes, whether I like the law or not. And that's what makes America great, is that we are a law-abiding, constitutional-loving, rule of law place where people from every corner of the world gather. And so it's important that we recognize that we have to follow the laws, because if we go around creating sanctuary cities, ignoring 287G, ignoring SB4, then we become a country of lawlessness. And that's what we see at the border, is lawlessness. So as Andrea knows, Juan Carlos, that ends my editorial comment.
Well, if I may, Orlando, I just want to add that I mean, the reason why we came to the US is because it is a country of laws, and those laws have allowed the country to be prosperous because you defend property rights and people's right to pursue the economic opportunity. So yes, we need a process, and what's happening at the border right now, it just shows that there's no process. It shows that the immigration
Correct.
system is broken, and when you don't provide ways for people to come in legally, then you're going to have people undocumented like my parents. I mean, they would have wished to have a legal pathway here that is easy, that's efficient, but it wasn't there. So they did what was best, and they came undocumented, but they came to work and they came to follow the laws. And laws like SB4, when they were first created, they were going to ask people for their immigration status even if they hadn't done anything wrong. And I'm glad that the federal court in New Orleans was able to rule that you can't just stop anybody for whatever. You have to have a valid reason for that. And I agree with that. But we have to find a solution so that people don't have to live in fear, and so that they can get right with the law. People would be happy to pay a fine or some sort of fee to get right with the law. They would be happy to learn English, like my dad, who speaks very good at English, actually. So we need a pathway, some sort of process, and we're not seeing that at the border. And we need legislation, and we can't just say that the border is the problem. We can't just like let that stop the conversation. And that's why I'm glad that we're having this conversation, because it moves the ball forward.
And
Yeah,
we have
no,
a
I and
question for you, one
hang
of
on
our
real quick. Let
viewers.
me just say that I agree with you. One of the criticisms I have, Juan Carlos, is that the United States immigration policy has been a wink and nod system because yeah, everybody knew it's a source of cheap labor, and it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate for the undocumented person that comes here, like your parents, who have hardships that are unending. It's a hardship for you. It's a hardship for the taxpayer. So yes, our plea is make Congress get to work and address the issue. Roll up your sleeves and defend the American taxpayer and come up with a solution to these immigration problems. Let me tell you, there are solutions, but ignoring it and having a wink and nod policy, which our policy has been, is not good for this country. So go ahead, Andrea, with a question.
Yeah, so we have one of our viewers, Eric Rubio. He said, I curious why your parents haven't gotten a green card resident alien status after being here so many years.
Oh, I love that question. So there's a 5 million backlog, 5 million visa cases backlog in the immigration system right now. That's a ton of cases. It takes more than 10 years to go to have your case looked at and to get a process. In fact, my parents actually qualified to get in line and get a green card through my youngest brother, who is the only U.S. citizen in our family. So my parents actually did the right thing, and they actually applied through my U.S. citizen brother to get a green card, and they right now are waiting, and they're going to continue to wait for many more years because the system we have is inefficient. And when you have an inefficient system, then you have basically a pull factor where people, instead of going through the line, will actually end up just being undocumented and working without status. So that's not what we want. And my hope is that my parents will be able to finally get that green card. But for example, that process for me doesn't exist. Nobody's petitioning me because my parents get priority with my U.S. citizen brother. So my U.S. citizen brother actually can't petition for me first, and if he could, then I would have to wait decades basically to get a green card. So that's something that I always try to tell people about, is that, hey, look, my parents actually are in a line. It's just a super long line, and also there's no guarantee they're going to be able to get a green card. My parents might get a rejection letter, which they have. There are errors in the immigration system. They recently got lots of requests for evidence, so it's a long, arduous process. And when you do that, then basically when it's easier to bring people here without status, and companies will do that. So that's something that the Reagan law didn't do right, is that you provided this incentive for companies to basically bring people here without status instead of going through the line. If it's easier to
Yeah, yeah.
break the law,
And Juan
then that's
Carlos,
a broken system.
yeah, and beyond that, you're providing the system for the human smugglers. Because if there were a legal system where people could apply legally and it was streamlined, you would put the human smugglers that bring people in undocumented out of business. That's another issue. But I wholeheartedly agree with you that the process, and this answers the question, Andrea, that our viewer asked. Why aren't people getting the green cards if they're eligible? I personally get contacted many, many times by folks, and I'm not going to use last names, but I have a dear friend who's a surgeon. I went to high school with him. I'm going to call him Dr. Phil. And Dr. Phil's daughter married a gentleman from El Salvador who didn't have documentation. So they asked me for a recommendation for a good immigration lawyer, and I recommended our dear friend Charles Foster at Foster Global. It's been over 2 years. Paul, the son-in-law, has been approved for a green card. It's been over 2 years. They have spent tens of thousands of dollars, and fortunately, they do have the money. But as Juan Carlos says, the line is so damn long. We don't know when Paul's going to get his green card. He's working here, supporting his family. He's now married and has a daughter that's a U.S. citizen, but is at any point, perhaps, and there have been mistakes. He gets a letter from the federal government saying, oh, you're no longer eligible. Then one day you are eligible. And so, yeah, to answer the question, It is a long, arduous, expensive process, and that's another issue that Congress needs to fix. Great question, by the way.
Juan Carlos, I'm going to ask you something else, related to the organization that you represent, and also related to the summit that you guys were part of last week on the Zoom. It was like business people and banks and things like that. And I remember when DACA was created in 2012, everybody was talking about finally they're going to be able to work, and then finally they're going to be able to buy a house. And you were just mentioning that you got married recently and you bought a house, and also you guys start businesses and start creating jobs. So tell me about that contribution, not only paying taxes, but also creating jobs and creating companies.
Absolutely. Here in Texas, there are over 8,600 DACA eligible dreamers who have created businesses and are creating jobs. I can give you the example of a business owner that we featured in our Latino Business Summit last week, who owns a jewelry and artisanal business in San Antonio called Vida Mia Boutique. And it just so happens that this DACA recipient, whose name is Monsi Contreras, she started this business because her father is undocumented and he started a jewelry business. So she was inspired by her father's jewelry business, and she created this side business to support her family and to support her mother, who unfortunately passed away due to cancer, but to basically provide that extra income. And she's also a devout church Catholic parishioner as well. So you have examples of this. I can give you an example of another entrepreneur from Dallas. His name is Alberto Garcia. He owns a company called Uniformity, who that creates uniforms for school children, and we know that the education system is so important, and we need to be able to educate our future workforce. He's creating jobs. He employs U.S. citizens in this company, 3 U.S. citizens, and he's doing a valuable service for the community. And that's what we need to support: is the dreamers and immigrants who create a value added service and are filling this need in the community, whether that be school uniforms for children or whether it be jewelry and things to look good for when you go to fiesta in San Antonio.
So
All
having
right,
said
look,
that,
Juan Carlos, we
what
want to, Andrea, we're about out of time. I'm going to let you finish the conversation with Juan Carlos, but Juan Carlos, I personally got to run. I've got another commitment up here. Uh, I want to thank you so much for your hard work. I'm just, as an immigrant, I'm proud of you for the things that you've been able to accomplish, for the bravery you have to take on these tough issues as legally an undocumented alien, but by no fault of your own, someone that your parents brought you here. It wasn't like it was your choice, and yet you've made the best of it. And so I admire you for living the American dream. I admire you for standing up and fighting. And at the end of the day, Juan Carlos, that's the beauty of our country, is that someone like you, who's an undocumented alien whose parents brought him in, can still stand up and fight and have protections under the U.S. Constitution. But we all have to do it under what we call the rule of law and under our Republican form of government. So thank you. And I want to invite you back in a few weeks, hopefully bring in some other folks to expand the conversation. Andrea, I will be back home tomorrow, and I will see you next Wednesday in studio. So for everybody that's watching this, thanks for joining us. And I'm going to check out. God bless y'all.
Great, Orlando. Thank you so much,
Thank
and
you.
looking to see you here. My last question, and that's a call to action, Juan Carlos, is what we can tell our viewers that they probably dreamers, or they probably have a friend that is a dreamer, or has relatives that is a dreamer, or just in general the community, what we can do together to try to change this situation, and also how dreamers can take advantage, or also opening more business, creating more jobs through your organization, or to the context that the organization can provide, or what is the platform that they can have, and to be able to do all of these things.
Absolutely. There are 204,000 DACA eligible dreamers across the state. Many are essential workers. They've opened businesses. They work as school teachers. and they have careers and they have homes and mortgages and rents, and we're contributing to the economy. That's why this issue is so important to Texas. And for your viewers, Senator Cornyn is working on this issue. He wants to provide a solution for dreamers, and he's asking for your support. He's asking you to call his office, to write to his office. He's asking you to write to Senator Ted Cruz as well and tell them that we need a DREAM Act, a permanent solution to the DACA program, a legal pathway for dreamers who grew up in this country, who were brought here by our undocumented parents, and to take advantage of this pathway to legalization, because it's going to give us opportunities to open more businesses and to pursue other opportunities and to hopefully one day be fully part of this country. So if you're a Texas Latino voter, go use your voice. There's no better time to do that right now. So again, thank you so much for having me, Andrea, and happy to be a resource for you and your constituency and your viewers.
That's great. We're gonna put your website also if people wanna, support the cause, and also if they wanna contact you, they can find you in that website, and they can have information about you over there.
Absolutely. And please join our coalition if you're a business owner at txopportunity.org.
Ok, great, Juan Carlos. Thank you so much for your time. Muchísimas gracias. Y de verdad que es un tema increíble, muy complejo, que necesitamos ahondar muchísimo más. Thank you so much, Juan Carlos, for visiting with us. And as Orlando said, hopefully we can have you back with other people talking, expanding the topic, because it's a very complex topic and we need really to understand to be able to help. That's the only way. And education is the key. If we educate ourselves, if we educate our family, and if we educate our community, we can make this happen and make America much better and reunited with everybody.
Muchas gracias, Andrea. Un gusto. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we're about to finish, but please also join us in TexasLatinoConservatives.com, TexasLatinoConservatives.com. Visit us our website. Please become a member. That's the only way that we can help, that you can help us to help and to grow this family of Texas Latino Conservatives and help the cause. Also, we have Latino leadership that we can educate and engage Latinos not only to participate in politics, but also if you want to run for office, we help you through the process. So thank you so much, everybody. I'll see you next Wednesday here at TLC Live, as every Wednesday at 11 in the morning. Bye-bye. Have a great day.